Buckeye Nation, welcome to episode 4 of the Silver Bullets podcast on the Ozone Radio Network. I'm your host, Shannon Sommers, contributor at theozone.net and producer of Acosta Field with Tony Gerdeman. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Chip Minnich, who is also a contributor at theozone.net and Athlon Sports. Chip, how are we doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Shannon. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Definitely. Today we have the honor of having Brett Ciancia of Pix Six Previews, I hope I said it right this time, on with us to help break down the Big Ten West Division. We'll be going through all 7 of the teams, not so much, some of them, like we were just talking about. Brett, thanks for taking the time out to join us again this year.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me back on again. It was a pleasure last year. Looking forward to breaking down the Big Ten for you. A conference that had 4 top 10 teams last year, not just 1 or 2. Like some of the other power conferences, but a solid conference here.
Yeah, and one of those actually came from the West, which everybody keeps saying is the weak division. Let's see here. Your site, Pix6Previews.com, that you launched in 2012, has a distinct privilege of being the most accurate Power 5 preview. Can you explain to our listeners what that means?
Yeah, so like you said, we launched our website in 2012. Over the last 5 years, our predictions, we come out with an annual, extensive college football preview in August. Our predictions have rated the most accurate in America, beating all newspapers, all magazines on newsstands, all online publications. There's a certain formula that a third-party site calculates, and amongst the Power 5 conferences, we are the most accurate over that time frame. So excited to break it down again. Year 6 coming up for us.
Well, the reason I bring that up is it's more of a self-pat on the back, because when we had you on last year, I believe you had Ohio State and Iowa. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Iowa or Nebraska. I think one of the two. Chip doesn't remember who he had over in the West, but he had Ohio State. I had Ohio State, but I also had Wisconsin. So out of the 3 of us, I had the best. Yeah. So I got to take my.
I remember last year it was we had Ohio State, and then we had a split at the top with Iowa and Nebraska. I remember being scared of Wisconsin's schedule. They've certainly proved me wrong, and it looks like the schedule reverses for them. We'll get into that later, I'm sure, but that was the issue last year. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Chip, you got anything before we start it off?
No, let's get going.
All right, let's start off with, right now you can pretty much coin flip this, I think. Might have a slight edge for one or the other, but you've got Illinois with Lovie Smith coming back after a dismal season last year. But this year he finally has his first recruiting class. And then we have Purdue. Purdue, who, new coach, new turnover. We're rooting for Darrell Hazel. But unfortunately, that was, it had to happen. So Jeff Brom takes over for them. Chip, you got anything on Illinois and Purdue you want to talk about real quick?
No, I think it's going to be a long year for both teams. Personally, I think Purdue will do better, but I'm sure Brett, has a lot more to say with regards to either team that we're going to be talking about.
What about you, Brett?
Yeah, I agree. I do have Purdue winning a head-to-head there to claim 6th place out of the Big Ten West. With Lovie Smith, they just really didn't have an identity. They went through quarterback issues last year. I don't see that being fixed this year coming back. With no pass threat, their run game was stifled on first downs and became very predictable. The strength of the team was D-line last year, and it's all gone. I just don't really see any glimmer of hope for me to claim to and say that that specific reason is why they're going to move out of the cellar. So I think Illinois is a safe bet for 7th and last in the Big Ten West. With Purdue, though, I can see an identity forming, and I'm pretty optimistic, at least long-term, with the hire. I don't know about this year because of the schedule, but you look at Purdue, they're back to their roots as an offense-first program. Joe Tiller had the high-powered attacks and sustained success for them in the last decade and a half. They went ahead and hired Darrell Hazel, as you guys know, a complete opposite. He's a Tressel disciple, very conservative. But that works when you have Buckeye talent, and they obviously didn't have that at Purdue. So I think going back to the air raid attack with the Brom brothers coming in, they had great success at Western Kentucky. I think they're going to bring a special flavor to the Big Ten West we haven't seen. But in terms of this season, it'll be tough. Quarterback threw 25 touchdowns, 21 picks. So you got to improve that ratio if you're going to be a passing team, right? All the receivers are gone. They're going to rely heavily on JUCOs. But for the Purdue-Illinois debate, I'm going Purdue 6, Illinois 7.
All right, looking at number 5. For me right now, it's kind of a toss-up. You got really, three teams to me fighting it out for that. But me personally right now, I think I'm going to go with Minnesota, even though I think Minnesota made a great hire with getting P.J. Fleck and getting everybody, the road boat there and Schema-Do, whatever. But, Chip, who do you have coming in 5th for the Big Ten West?
I'm gonna actually depart from you. I'm gonna go with Nebraska on that. I think Nebraska. I think Nebraska. I think they're in the right direction. I think that for the first time, Mike Riley has a quarterback in Tanner Lee who fits what he has wanted to do offensively, and they're going to a 3-4 defense with Bob Diaco coming in. My biggest concern, quite frankly, is when it comes to the 3-4, it's such a difficult defense to run at the college level because you have to have the right personnel to do it. Having that dominant nose tackle, having the kind of linebackers that can fluctuate between defensive end. I'll readily concede that the 3-4 gives you a lot more versatility in terms of how you can kind of disguise coverages. But my biggest issue defensively is I think Nebraska, I don't know if they have the personnel yet in order to do it. When I look at Nebraska's schedule, the fact that in the second week of the season, they go to Oregon, and then kind of in the middle of the season, they get Wisconsin coming to Nebraska. Ohio State comes in the middle of October, and then near the end of the season, playing Northwestern, at Minnesota, at Penn State, Iowa. So I'm thinking realistically, with the talent on hand, I'm thinking like a 7-5 season. I think they'll go to a bowl, but I just think Mike Riley, I think this is a transition year offensively and defensively, and I just don't know if they have the personnel to finish any higher in the Big Ten West.
What are your thoughts for the 5th place team, Brett?
With the 5th spot, I'm going with Minnesota. They went in with a completely different approach here with their hiring process. You see that often where you kind of hire the opposite of your former coach. They had the very reserved Tracy Clays, and then they stay within the program. Now they bring in energetic Pete Fleck. You had mentioned it. It's going to be kind of a culture change. So obviously it took him 3 or 4 years to get it up to par at Western Michigan. I don't know if this Minnesota roster will cash in that quickly with this new, energy level and an approach and identity and everything. So I'm a little bit bearish on Minnesota. They have a great running back duo, Rodney Smith and Shannon Brooks. They're going to remain with the run-based attack, although I think Fleck will bring a little bit more tempo, but it'll still be the classic Big Ten look. But, yeah, to me, we talked about Nebraska going through its transition. I don't really see any certainties with Minnesota's roster. It's going to be a total mystery quarterback. The O-line needs work and some consistency, which we missed. Not a single offensive lineman started in all 13 games last year. Really no playmakers on the outsides, especially with Wolotarski leaving. I guess the strength would be a D-line with Richardson there, but the secondary loses all its playmakers. So I'm pretty pessimistic on Minnesota. I think they're going to finish 5th there.
Yeah, I think their problem is just not having the talent that P.J. Fleck needs. Like you're pretty much saying, the offensive line is going to be a lot better having Ed Warner as their offensive line coach, former Buckeye co-offensive coordinator. But the quarterbacks don't have, any kind of experience. You're building something new, and I think they're lacking in defense, although they're linebackers. I think they're deep at linebackers. They do have a favorable schedule. I just don't think it's enough for them to overcome with, changing everything the way that they have.
Yeah, and they've recruited in the 50s and 60s over the last 5 years, so it's not they have a full cupboard there for Fleck to build with. So, I'm a little bit more pessimistic with them. And I'm surprised you had Nebraska at 5th. I can see the argument that way too, but I kind of broke it into 2 tiers in the middle here. I have Nebraska Northwestern towards the top, and then Iowa, Minnesota towards the bottom of this middle tier. But we'll get into that further as we move on.
And speaking of Iowa, me right now, I have them penciled in as 5th. you don't know what you're going to get from Iowa. They have an easy schedule, and they turn around and they lose games that they shouldn't. They have a hard schedule, and they win the tough games. It seems like Iowa gets up for the big boys, but doesn't, Ferentz doesn't get them up for the other teams. Chip, who do you think is going to be in the fourth spot?
In the fourth spot, that's actually where I have Iowa situated, just because you already referenced, Shannon, the schedule. Looking at Iowa's schedule, they have Penn State September 23rd, which could be. That's always, Iowa's always one of those mystery teams. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, when you expect them to do well, you expect them to do well. They do poorly. When you expect them to do poorly, they do well. But the schedule, that September 23rd Penn State game, then they go to Michigan State, and then in October, looking at it, at Northwestern, they've got Minnesota, they've got Ohio State coming, which I'm just wondering why the Big Ten hasn't announced that as a night game, because you know full well that that's going to be out in Iowa. They have to go to Wisconsin. They finish up the season at Nebraska. So we've already referenced the schedule difficulty. They do have a lot of talent. The offensive line is going to be the strength of the team. Akram Wadley is probably one of the most underrated backs in the Big Ten, completely overshadowed. Josie Jewell's a very good linebacker. I just think that the schedule does them no favors. That's why I put them at fourth. I think they'll go to a bowl game again, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't see them contending for the Big Ten West this season.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of. I mean, I know Nebraska looks like it right now on paper to have a tougher schedule, but it looks like to me Iowa they have a tougher schedule with that Penn State and Michigan State, depending on which Michigan State Sparty team shows up this year. Is it a 3-9 team, or is it a revamped top 5 program tier that D'Antonio had before? But then having, Ohio State and going to Wisconsin, that's rough. Brett, who's your team in fourth?
Yeah, I actually also have Iowa at fourth. When I try and go and forecast these divisions and look at scheduling, like you guys have already hit on, the two things I look at are cross-division matchups, because that can sway drastically if you're hitting the top teams or the lower teams. And then you look at where they are relatively within their division, those swing games. Are they home or away? So obviously with Wisconsin, I think that they'll, as West favorites, they'll lose that game. I'm talking about the swing teams right in the middle, like Northwestern, Nebraska. Both of those on the road. And then when you look at the crossover games, you guys already mentioned, but Ohio State, Penn State. So, I mean, that could be 4 losses right there. Shannon, you also mentioned they're all over the place, though, with wins and losses, underdogs and favorites. They always surprise. But they do have that constant identity, the typical Big Ten look. That's been constant as Kirk Ferentz becomes the longest tenured coach in America, built on the strong O-line, the workhorse back, and the ball control. Most of that is there, like you guys hit on. All 5 offensive linemen are back, and that group actually won the Moore Award, which is a lesser-known award, but it's given out for the top offensive line as a unit. So a strong O-line, that's what the team's going to be built around. But again, kind of like Minnesota, to me, just the lack of playmakers in the wide receiver positions and secondary. I don't really see them stretching the field vertically. Although it seems like every year out of Iowa, we hear they're bringing high-paced tempo. That's just an annual joke now because they just get back to their roots. But, I just see it kind of like Minnesota, not so much playmaking ability, a huge question mark at quarterback with Nathan Stanley. And then on top of all that, just the schedule. So that moves them from the second, third area down to fourth from there.
Yeah, when I look at their defense, I mean, they have another linebacker core that's pretty good. But I look at their secondary, and they lost King. And last year, it just really didn't look that great except for against Michigan. Not really great, but, they held Michigan and walked away with that win, which was awesome for Ohio State fans. But